I'm Charlotte, 30, a former kindergarten teacher who married into the prestigious Harrison family. My husband Michael always said our worlds were different, but love would bridge the gap. His mother Eleanor never agreed. From day one, she made it clear I didn't belong in their wealthy circles with my middle-class background. Then came that dinner party where she pushed me and declared I had no right to speak in this house. But what happened next changed everything and taught Eleanor a lesson she'd never forget. Before I continue, where are you watching from? Drop your location, in the comments hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Have you ever dealt with controlling in-laws? I'd love to hear your stories. When I think back to the life I had before marrying into the Harrison family, it feels like looking at a photograph of someone else. I grew up in Mapleton, a small town in Iowa, where everyone knew each other, where my parents' modest two-story home, with its slightly crooked mailbox, was more than enough for us. My father worked as a high school math teacher, and my mother ran a small bakery downtown. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had everything we needed, especially love and respect. After college, I followed in my father's footsteps and became a teacher, though I preferred working with younger children. There was something magical about kindergarten, watching 5-year-olds discover the world, their faces lighting up when they finally recognized a letter or counted to 20. I'd been teaching for 5 years at Mapleton Elementary when my friend Jess convinced me to volunteer at a charity gala in Chicago, just 2 hours from our town. "It'll be fun," she insisted. "Plus there'll be rich, handsome men there." I laughed and told her I wasn't looking for a rich husband, but I agreed to go anyway. The event was raising money for education in underserved communities, a cause close to my heart. That night changed everything. I was manning the donation table wearing a simple blue dress I'd found on sale when Michael Harrison approached. Tall with warm brown eyes and a smile that seemed genuine, among the plastic expressions of the wealthy donors, he stood out immediately. "I'd like to make a donation," he said, then added with a playful smile, "and maybe get your number too." I was charmed but cautious. Michael wasn't just wealthy. As I would later learn, he was from one of Chicago's oldest and most prestigious families. The Harrisons had made their fortune in real estate generations ago and had only expanded their empire since. Michael was their only son, the heir to everything. Against all odds, we connected that night. He wasn't what I expected. There was no arrogance, no condescension in the way he spoke to me. Instead, he listened intently as I talked about my students, my passion for education, my dreams of eventually opening a progressive elementary school focused on experiential learning. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Weekend trips where he'd fly me to Chicago, romantic dinners, long phone calls on weeknights when we were apart. 3 months in, he took me to meet his parents at their Lake Forest estate, a sprawling mansion set on manicured grounds that made me feel like I'd stepped into a different world. I still remember my first glimpse of Eleanor Harrison. Tall and slender, with perfectly coiffed silver blonde hair, wearing a cashmere sweater set that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked me up and down. "So you're the teacher Michael's been telling us about," she said, emphasizing teacher, as if it were a curious oddity. How refreshing to meet someone with such simple ambitions. Michael's father William seemed kinder, a tall, distinguished man with Michael's same warm eyes, though his seemed tired somehow. He shook my hand warmly and asked genuine questions about my work, but it was clear from the beginning who controlled the Harrison household. William deferred to Eleanor on everything from dinner conversation topics to when dessert would be served. The dinner was excruciating. Eleanor peppered me with questions about my family, each one designed to highlight the gap between my background and theirs. "And your mother runs a bakery, you said? How quaint. Does she do those cupcakes with the sprinkles that children love?" My mother's bakery had won regional awards and was known for its artisanal bread and French pastries, but I simply smiled and answered politely. Michael squeezed my hand under the table, silently apologizing. Despite that disastrous first meeting, Michael proposed 6 months later. I said yes because I loved him, because I believed our connection transcended his family's disapproval. We were married in a ceremony that should have been intimate and personal, but was transformed by Eleanor into a society event, featuring 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. "You'll thank me later," she told me when I expressed concern about the growing guest list. "These connections will be important for Michael's future. And yours, I suppose. Though I can't imagine what a kindergarten teacher will have to talk about with the Whitakers." I wanted to wear my mother's wedding dress altered and updated by a local seamstress, but Eleanor insisted on taking me to an exclusive bridal salon where she selected a gown that cost more than my car. "We can't have you looking provincial," she explained with that thin smile. "Remember, you're a Harrison now, or you will be." Michael tried to mediate, but he'd spent his entire life appeasing his mother. "She means well," he would say. "She just wants the best for us." After the wedding, we moved into a house in the same exclusive North Shore neighborhood as his parents. A house they had purchased as a wedding gift, though it felt more like a way to keep us under Eleanor's watchful eye. It was beautiful, but never felt like mine, especially when Eleanor would let herself in, without knocking, to check on things, or bring over decorative items that were more to her taste than mine. "This little vase isn't really suitable for the entryway, Charlotte. I've brought something more appropriate." My colourful handmade pottery vase from a local artist would disappear, replaced by something crystal and cold. When I protested to Michael, he would sigh. "Is it really worth fighting about? You know how she gets." I did know. Eleanor's disapproval could take many forms. Icy silence, barbed comments disguised as concern, or the tearful manipulation that always seemed to work on Michael. "I only want what's best for this family. I've devoted my life to maintaining our position." When I mentioned looking for teaching positions in nearby schools, Eleanor was horrified. "A Harrison wife doesn't work, Charlotte. What would people think, that Michael can't provide for you? It's not about money." I tried to explain. "Teaching is my passion, my purpose." "Your purpose now is to be Michael's wife," she countered. "To support his career, to maintain a suitable home, to eventually raise suitable children." The emphasis on suitable made it clear she had concerns about any grandchildren with my genes. Michael's work at the family company kept him busy with long hours and frequent business trips. I was often alone in our beautiful soulless house, trying to carve out some sense of purpose, while Eleanor orchestrated my social calendar with charity committees and ladies' luncheons, where I was clearly an outsider. I overheard her at one such lunch speaking to her friend Vivian. "Yes, Charlotte comes from rather unfortunate circumstances, a teacher from some small town, but Michael was quite insistent, and you know how boys can be when they're infatuated. I'm sure the novelty will wear off eventually." With each passing month, I felt more isolated. My friends from Mapleton couldn't relate to my new life, and I made few genuine connections among Eleanor's social circle. The only person who truly understood was my younger sister Amanda, who lived in a Chicago apartment with 2 roommates and worked as a graphic designer. "You need to stand up to her," Amanda insisted during our weekly coffee dates, the one standing appointment Eleanor couldn't control. "This is your life, your marriage." "It's not that simple," I would reply. "She's his mother, and this is the world he comes from." "So what? You're his wife, and he didn't marry his mother." But in some ways, it felt like Eleanor was as much a part of our marriage as Michael and I were. She inserted herself into every decision, from holiday plans to home renovations. When Michael and I discussed starting a family, Eleanor somehow knew about it before we'd told anyone. "I've been looking into the right preschools," she announced over Sunday dinner at their house. Another standing obligation. "The waiting lists are quite competitive. Of course, the Harrison name should help, but one can't be too prepared." "Mum, we're not even pregnant yet," Michael said with an uncomfortable laugh. "Precisely why we need to plan now," Eleanor replied, not bothering to look up from her roast chicken. "Especially given Charlotte's background. We'll need to ensure the right influences from the start." The final straw came when I returned home from a rare weekend away with Amanda to find that Eleanor had been in our house in our bedroom and had accidentally knocked over and broken the handmade quilt rack that held my late grandmother's quilt. "It was such an eyesore anyway," she said dismissively when confronted. "That quilt was falling apart. I've ordered a lovely new duvet from Neiman Marcus that will be much more appropriate." I stood in our bedroom, holding the pieces of the wooden rack my grandfather had made fighting back tears of rage and grief. The quilt, slightly worn but still beautiful with its intricate pattern of blues and purples, had been relegated to a plastic bin in the corner. It was the last gift my grandmother had given me before she passed away when I was 16. That night, I finally broke down. "I can't do this anymore, Michael. I can't live with your mother controlling every aspect of our lives." "Hakerese." Michael held me as I cried, promising things would change. "I'll talk to her," he said. "She needs to respect our boundaries." But the conversation, if it happened at all, changed nothing, and I was beginning to realize that perhaps nothing ever would. The invitation arrived on heavy cream stationery with the Harrison family crest embossed in gold. Eleanor was hosting a dinner party at our house, not her house, our house, in 2 weeks. The guest list included the mayor of Chicago, several prominent business leaders, and the board members of the Harrison Family Foundation. They would be discussing a new development project in an up-and-coming neighborhood. I learned about this when the invitation was already in the mail. I took the liberty of organizing this for Michael, Eleanor explained over the phone, her tone making it clear that my input was neither needed nor wanted. It's crucial for his position in the company. William is considering stepping back, and this will help cement Michael's leadership. Shouldn't we have discussed this first? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. This is our home, Eleanor. Well, yes, technically, but it's a Harrison family matter and time was of the essence. Now I've already spoken with the caterer and florist. I'll come by tomorrow to discuss the seating arrangement and go over what you should wear. Something conservative, I think. That green dress you wore to the symphony was acceptable. My hands tightened around the phone. I'm not sure that's necessary. I can handle the hosting duties. Eleanor's laugh was like glass breaking. Oh, Charlotte, this isn't a kindergarten class pizza party. These are important people. Just follow my lead, smile, and try not to say anything that might embarrass Michael. After hanging up, I sat at our kitchen island staring at the invitation. This was my home, and yet I had no say in who entered it or what happened here. In that moment, I made a decision. I would be the perfect hostess at this dinner party. Gracious, intelligent, and unmistakably the lady of the house. Not for Eleanor's sake, but for my own, and for Michael. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of preparations. Eleanor was constantly present, rearranging furniture, directing staff, and critiquing everything from the water glasses to the guest towels in the powder room. I smiled and nodded while quietly making my own preparations, researching the guests so I could engage in informed conversation, selecting a sophisticated but understated black dress that accentuated my figure without being flashy, and preparing our home in ways that subtly reasserted my presence. The small touches were my silent rebellion. Fresh flowers from my mother's favorite local florist, rather than Eleanor's preferred Chicago designer handwritten place cards in my own calligraphy, rather than the printed ones Eleanor had ordered, and my grandmother's lace tablecloth beneath the fine china and crystal. On the evening of the party, I was ready. I greeted the first guests at the door alongside Michael, who looked handsome in his tailored suit if slightly tense. Eleanor arrived early, of course, wearing an ice blue gown that probably cost more than a teacher's monthly salary. "Charlotte," she said with a critical eye, "your hair would look better up with that neckline. And where are the Waterford crystal champagne flutes I sent over?" "I thought the Baccarat set worked better with the tablescape," I replied pleasantly. "And I prefer my hair down. Michael likes it this way." Before she could respond, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the mayor and his wife Susan. Eleanor immediately took control of the introductions, subtly maneuvering herself between Michael and me. "Mayor Phillips, how wonderful to see you. You remember my son Michael, of course. And this is his wife. Not this is Charlotte, or even this is Michael's wife Charlotte. Just his wife, as if my name was irrelevant." I extended my hand with a warm smile. "Charlotte Harrison, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our home, Mayor Phillips. Mrs. Phillips, your work with the Children's Hospital Foundation is truly inspiring." Susan Phillips looked pleased at the recognition. "Thank you. Please call me Susan, and you must call me Charlotte. Michael speaks so highly of you." Eleanor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly as she guided them toward the living room where cocktails were being served. Throughout the next half hour, the pattern repeated with each arriving guest. Eleanor would attempt to minimize my presence. I would assert myself with knowledge and grace. By the time we moved to the dining room, a subtle tension had established itself. The guests seemed to sense it, glancing between Eleanor and me with curious expressions. Michael remained oblivious, focused on discussing the development project with the mayor and foundation board members. I was seated at one end of the table with Michael at the other, a traditional arrangement that nevertheless felt symbolic of the distance growing between us. Eleanor had positioned herself near Michael naturally, while I found myself next to Susan Phillips and Lawrence Rodriguez, the city's planning commissioner. The first courses proceeded without incident. I engaged Susan in conversation about her foundation work, finding genuine common ground in our shared interest in children's welfare. "I used to teach kindergarten," I explained when she asked about my background. "Early childhood education has always been my passion." "Really? We're always looking for board members with education experience," Susan said enthusiastically. The foundation is expanding its focus to include early intervention programs. Eleanor, who had been monitoring conversations around the table like a hawk, interrupted from several seats away. Charlotte's teaching days are behind her now. She's focusing on supporting Michael's career and our family's philanthropic interests. I smiled politely. While I'm certainly committed to supporting Michael and participating in the Harrison Foundation education remains close to my heart. In fact, I've been exploring ways to combine these interests. Susan nodded. That makes perfect sense. Perhaps you could advise on our new literacy initiative. We're looking to place volunteers in underserved schools. Charlotte doesn't have time for that sort of thing. Eleanor cut in again, her voice sharper. The Harrison social obligations are quite demanding. I noticed several guests exchanging glances. Michael was deep in conversation at his end of the table, unaware of the growing tension. Actually, I said calmly, I think it sounds like a wonderful opportunity. Early literacy is so crucial for later academic success. Research shows that children who aren't reading at grade level by 3rd grade are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. Susan and Lawrence both nodded with interest, and I continued sharing some insights from my teaching experience. The conversation flowed naturally until Eleanor's voice cut through like a knife. Charlotte, perhaps we should let the others discuss the development project. That is why we're here after all. Education will be an important component of the community centre in the new development, Lawrence pointed out. Charlotte's perspective is valuable. Eleanor's face flushed slightly. I could see the calculation in her eyes. She couldn't directly contradict a city official, but she wasn't about to let me claim any legitimacy at this table. How charming that you think so, she said with a thin smile. But playing with children while surely entertaining hardly qualifies one to advise on a multi-million-dollar development project. The table grew quiet. I felt heat rising to my cheeks but kept my composure. Early childhood education is far more than playing with children, I said evenly. It's about building the cognitive, social, and emotional foundations that shape an entire life. Something I would think the Harrison Family Foundation would value, given its mission statement about empowering future generations. Several guests nodded in agreement. Susan Phillips looked impressed, but Eleanor's expression had hardened into something dangerous. She had never been publicly challenged, certainly not in what she considered her domain, even if that domain was in fact my home. Well, she said with a brittle laugh, I suppose everyone's entitled to their opinions, uninformed as they may be. It's not an opinion, Eleanor, I replied, still keeping my voice pleasant. It's supported by decades of research. I'd be happy to share some scholarly articles if you're interested in learning more. The flash in Eleanor's eyes told me I'd crossed a line. In the Harrison family, Eleanor's word was law. Contradicting her simply wasn't done, especially not in front of important guests. But this was my house, my dinner table, and I was tired of being silenced. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Eleanor stood abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. You have no right to speak in this house, she snapped, her voice ringing in the sudden silence. Then, as if words weren't enough, she strode around the table toward me and actually pushed me, her hands making contact with my shoulder, causing me to jerk backward in my chair. The room froze. Every guest stared in shock. Even the servers paused in the doorway, unsure whether to proceed with the next course. In that moment, I saw my marriage clearly for the first time. The constant deference to Eleanor, the gradual erosion of my identity, the subtle and not so subtle ways I had been told I didn't belong. And I saw Michael's face, finally aware of the confrontation, looking horrified, but also paralyzed, unable to choose between his wife and his mother. I stood slowly straightening my shoulders. The room remained utterly silent as I looked Eleanor directly in the eyes. This is my home, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I am Michael's wife. I have built a career educating children, and I will not apologize for having an informed perspective. You owe me an apology for that behavior, Eleanor. Eleanor's face contorted with rage and disbelief. No one spoke to her this way. Ever. How dare you, she hissed. After everything we've done for you, taking you in from your little nothing town, giving you this house, this life. Eleanor, that's enough. Michael finally found his voice rising from his seat. But it was too little, too late. I didn't ask for this house, I said, still maintaining my composure, though my heart was pounding. I didn't ask for your approval or your interference. I only asked for respect, which you've never given me. I turned to the table of stunned guests. I apologize for this disruption to our dinner. Please excuse me for a moment. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked from the dining room through the kitchen and out the back door to the garden. The cool evening air filled my lungs as I tried to process what had just happened. Eleanor had actually physically pushed me, in front of the Mayor Foundation board members and business leaders. The line had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. I heard the door open behind me and turned expecting Michael. Instead, it was Susan Phillips. "Are you all right?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. "I'm sorry you had to witness that." "Don't apologize, Marsim," Susan said firmly. "That behavior was completely unacceptable. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not in their own home." Her kindness nearly broke my composure. "Thank you. For what it's worth," she added, "I think your background in education is exactly what our foundation needs, and what that development project needs. Here's my card. Call me when the dust settles." She squeezed my arm supportively before returning inside. I remained in the garden gathering my thoughts. My marriage had just hit a breaking point in front of a dozen witnesses. Whatever happened next would define our future, if we still had one. After several minutes, Michael finally appeared, his face drawn with stress. "Charlotte, I'm so sorry. I've never seen her like that before." But that wasn't quite true. Was it Eleanor had always been controlling, dismissive, and manipulative, just usually with more subtlety and without an audience? "What happens now?" I asked simply. Michael ran a hand through his hair. "I've asked everyone to leave. Dad is taking Mom home. She's upset. She's upset." I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. She publicly humiliated me, pushed me, and told me I have no right to speak in my own home, and she's the one who's upset. "I didn't mean it like that," Michael said quickly. "What she did was completely out of line, inexcusable. Yet you're still concerned about her feelings." Michael looked torn, the same expression he'd worn countless times when caught between his wife and his mother. But this time I wasn't willing to accept it. "I need some space," I said finally. "I'm going to stay with Amanda for a few days. I need to think about whether this marriage can work if you can't set boundaries with your mother. Charlotte, please." Michael began reaching for my hand. "We can work this out." I stepped back. "Can we? Because for 5 years I've been trying to make this work. I've been polite. I've been accommodating. I've swallowed my pride and bit my tongue. And where has it gotten me? Pushed aside in my own home, literally and figuratively." "I'll talk to her," he promised, as he had so many times before. "This time will be different." "It has to be," I said, turning toward the house, "because I can't live like this anymore." I went upstairs to our bedroom and packed a small suitcase, moving on autopilot. As I zipped it closed, I glanced at our wedding photo on the dresser, both of us smiling so full of hope for our future. Had we been naive? Or had we simply underestimated the power of family dynamics and ingrained patterns? Michael watched from the doorway as I packed, his expression a mixture of confusion and desperation. In that moment, I realized he had never really had to fight for anything in his life. Everything had always been arranged for him, by his parents, by his family name, by his privilege. And now faced with the potential loss of his marriage, he seemed utterly lost. "I love you," he said, as I wheeled my suitcase toward the stairs. "I love you too," I replied and meant it. That's why this hurts so much. I called an Uber and waited in the driveway, refusing Michael's offer to drive me to Amanda's apartment. As the car pulled away, I saw him standing in the doorway of our beautiful house, looking more alone than I'd ever seen him. Despite everything, my heart ached for him, but it was time to put myself first for once. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: Eleanor would soon regret the moment she pushed me, in more ways than one. The sanctuary of Amanda's apartment was exactly what I needed. My younger sister had always been my fiercest defender, even when we were children. When I arrived at her door close to midnight, suitcase in hand, and mascara smudged from unexpected tears, she asked no questions, just pulled me into a hug and led me to her spare bedroom. "Wine or tea?" she asked. "Tea first, wine after I explain." We sat at her small kitchen table, steaming mugs between us, as I recounted the disastrous dinner party. Amanda's expression shifted from shock to outrage as I described Eleanor's public humiliation and the physical push that had crossed every conceivable line. "That's assault," Amanda said flatly. "You could press charges." I shook my head. "I'm not going to escalate this legally, but I am taking a stand." "Finally," Amanda muttered. She'd never hidden her dislike of Eleanor or her frustration with my attempts to keep the peace. And where was Michael during all this? Let me guess. Frozen like a deer in headlights. The accuracy of her assessment stung. He did eventually ask everyone to leave and told his father to take Eleanor home. Eventually, after she'd already pushed you and told you that you had no right to speak in your own house. Amanda's eyes flashed with anger. He's been enabling her behavior for years, Charlotte. When is he going to put you first? That was the question, wasn't it? The one I'd been avoiding through 5 years of marriage. I don't know, I admitted. That's why I needed space, to figure out if this marriage can be saved or if it should be. My phone had been buzzing consistently since I left the house. Texts and calls from Michael, each more desperate than the last. Please come home, we need to talk. I'm so sorry. What Mom did was inexcusable. Tell me what I can do to fix this. I finally sent a brief response. I need time to think. I'll call you tomorrow. As promised, I switched to wine as Amanda and I talked late into the night. For the first time, I allowed myself to voice all the frustrations and hurts I'd suppressed over the years. The constant criticism, the undermining the way Eleanor had systematically tried to erase my identity and replace it with her version of a Harrison wife. You know what makes me angriest? I said as we started on our second bottle. Not that she pushed me, though that was horrible. It's that she tried to dismiss my entire career, my passion, my expertise as playing with children, as if the formative years of a person's life are meaningless. Amanda nodded. She can't stand that you have your own identity, your own value outside of being Michael's wife. It threatens her. But why I've never tried to come between Michael and his family. I've bent over backward to accommodate her demands. That's exactly it, Amanda said, topping off our glasses. You've been so accommodating that she thought she could control you completely. Tonight you stood up for yourself and it shattered her illusion of control. The next morning, heavy with wine and emotional exhaustion, I awoke to more texts from Michael, including one saying he was coming over. I texted back quickly, not ready to see you yet, please respect my space. His response was immediate, I understand, but I need you to know I'm fighting for us. What that meant remained unclear until later that day when Amanda returned from a coffee run with wide eyes. You're not going to believe this. Meredith from my yoga class works at the country club. She overheard Eleanor telling her friends that you had a mental breakdown at the dinner party, that the pressure of being a Harrison was too much for someone of your background, and you lashed out inappropriately. The shock was followed quickly by a wave of anger. She's trying to control the narrative, make me sound unstable. Classic gaslighting, Amanda agreed. But here's the thing. Meredith said some of the women didn't seem to be buying it. Apparently, Susan Phillips has been telling people what really happened. The mayor's wife had kept her word about staying in touch. An email arrived that afternoon inviting me to coffee to discuss the Foundation's literacy initiative. The message included a pointed line, I admire your composure under difficult circumstances. That kind of grace under pressure is exactly what our board needs. While I was processing this, a text arrived from an unexpected source, Jake Wilson, Michael's business partner and closest friend since college. Can we meet? There are some things you should know. I agreed to meet Jake at a small cafe far from the Harrison social circles. He arrived looking uncharacteristically serious, the usual easy smile absent from his face. Thanks for coming, he said as we settled with our coffees. I wanted to talk to you directly because I've watched this pattern before. And I can't stay silent anymore. What pattern? Jake sighed. Eleanor's interference in Michael's relationships. You're not the first woman she's tried to drive away, but you're the first who's lasted this long and the first he's actually married. This was news to me. Michael had mentioned a few college girlfriends, but nothing serious before me. 5 years ago, Jake continued. Before he met you, Michael was engaged to a woman named Rachel. She was from a good family, not as wealthy as the Harrisons, but socially acceptable. Eleanor seemed to approve at first, but as the wedding got closer, she became increasingly critical and controlling. What happened? Rachel suddenly broke off the engagement 2 months before the wedding. She told Michael she'd realized they wanted different things from life. He was devastated. Jake paused, looking uncomfortable. I found out later that Eleanor had met with Rachel privately and told her that Michael was planning to ask her to sign a post-nuptial agreement with extreme terms, basically leaving her nothing if they divorced. She claimed it was Michael's idea, that he'd told her Rachel was only after the Harrison money. That's horrible, I gasped. And none of it was true. None of it. Michael had actually been talking about changing the Harrison family trust to make it more equitable for his future wife. But Rachel never gave him the chance to explain. She just disappeared from his life. The revelation stunned me. Does Michael know what his mother did? Jake shook his head. I tried to tell him my suspicions once, but he shut down the conversation immediately. He couldn't bear to think his mother would sabotage his happiness that way. But why tell me this now? Because history is repeating itself. Michael is miserable without you, Charlotte. He's finally standing up to Eleanor, and I don't want her manipulations to destroy another relationship he cares about. Jake leaned forward earnestly. He fired the family's longtime interior designer yesterday because she mentioned redecorating your house now that things were changing. Apparently, Eleanor had already been making plans to erase your presence. This was surprising. Michael firing anyone connected to his family business was unprecedented. Maybe he was finally finding his backbone. As I left the cafe, my phone pinged with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Charlotte, this is William Harrison. I think we need to talk. Could we meet tomorrow? Michael's father wanting to meet privately was another unexpected development. I agreed to meet him at a bookstore cafe the following afternoon. William looked older than when I'd last seen him, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders slightly stooped. He greeted me with a gentle hug. Thank you for meeting me, he said as we sat with our coffees. I want to apologize for what happened at the dinner party. Eleanor's behavior was inexcusable. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by his sincere tone. But you don't need to apologize for her. Perhaps not, but I need to apologize for enabling her behavior for so many years, including toward you. He stared into his coffee cup. I love my wife Charlotte, but I've allowed her controlling nature to go unchecked for decades, and it's hurt many people, including our son. Why are you telling me this now? William's sad smile held years of regret. Because watching you stand up to her made me realize how seldom I've done the same. The easy path isn't always the right one. We talked for over an hour. William shared insights into Eleanor's background that I'd never known. How she'd come from a middle-class family herself, but had been determined to rise socially, how she'd experienced rejection and humiliation in her early days as a Harrison bride, how she'd channeled that hurt into an iron determination to control every aspect of the family's image and relationships. It doesn't excuse what she's done, William said, but perhaps it helps explain it. She sees in you everything she tried to leave behind, and everything authentic she lost along the way. As our conversation wound down, William mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Eleanor's been using Michael's laptop when he leaves it at the house. She mentioned seeing some emails about a school you were thinking of opening. My private dream, a progressive elementary school I'd been researching and quietly planning for nearly a year. I'd only discussed it with Michael and only via email or at home. I'd never mentioned it to Eleanor. She shouldn't have access to those emails, I said slowly. No, she shouldn't, William agreed, looking troubled. And that's not the first time she's crossed such boundaries. When I returned to Amanda's apartment, I found Michael waiting outside the building. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, clothes wrinkled as if he'd slept in them. Please, he said simply. 5 minutes. I agreed, and we walked to a nearby park. The autumn air was crisp leaves crunching beneath our feet. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Michael began. About us, about my mother, about the patterns I've allowed to continue. So have I. I want to fight for our marriage, Charlotte. I know I've failed you by not standing up to my mother, by always choosing the path of least resistance. I'm sorry. His apology seemed sincere, but I'd heard promises before. Michael, I need to ask you something important. Did you know your mother has been accessing your emails? Reading our private conversations? His shocked expression answered before his words could. What? No, how would she even? Your father mentioned she uses your laptop when you leave it at their house. She knew about my school plans, Michael. Plans I've only discussed with you via email or at home. Michael's face flushed with anger. That's a complete invasion of privacy. I had no idea. There's more, I said, and told him what Jake had revealed about his former fiancée, Rachel. Michael listened in stunned silence, his expression cycling through disbelief, hurt, and finally a cold anger I'd never seen before. I need to verify this, he said when I finished. If it's true. Jake has no reason to lie, and it fits a pattern. Michael nodded slowly. Yes, a pattern I've been blind to for too long. He reached for my hand. I know words aren't enough, Charlotte, but I'm going to prove to you that I can change, that I can put our marriage first, whatever it takes. Even if it means real boundaries with your mother, even if she doesn't accept them. Even then, he said firmly, I can't lose you. These past days have shown me what that would mean, and I won't let it happen. I didn't go home with Michael that day. I needed more than words. I needed evidence of real change. But I did agree to meet him again to keep the conversation going. Over the next week, Michael took actions that surprised me. He changed all his passwords and set up two-factor authentication on his accounts. He retrieved his laptop from his parents' house and discovered a keylogger program had been installed, evidence that Eleanor had indeed been monitoring his communications possibly for years. Most significantly, he confronted Eleanor directly about Rachel. The conversation didn't go well from what he told me. She denied everything at first, then tried to justify her actions as protecting him from a gold digger, and finally resorted to tears and accusations that he was choosing me over family. I am choosing you, Michael told me when he recounted the conversation. Not over family, but over unhealthy control and manipulation. There's a difference. The final revelation came when I retrieved my own laptop from our house and decided to check if it had been tampered with. A tech-savvy friend of Amanda's discovered that someone had accessed my personal email and journal files, documents that contained my private thoughts, including frustrations about Eleanor, and details about my teaching career that she could never have known otherwise. She's been reading my private journal, I told Michael, feeling violated and furious. For how long, I don't know. That was the breaking point for Michael. He asked me to meet him, his parents, and a family therapist at a neutral location to address everything that had happened and establish a path forward, if there could be one. You don't have to do this if you're not ready, Fo, he assured me. But if we're going to have any chance of saving our marriage and creating healthy family relationships, we need to confront this directly. I agreed, though the prospect of facing Eleanor after everything that had happened filled me with anxiety. But I was done hiding, done accommodating, done pretending. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the same dignity and strength I'd found at that fateful dinner party. The conference room at the therapist's office felt too small for the magnitude of what we were addressing. Dr. Bennett, a calm woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanour, had arranged 4 chairs in a loose circle. No desk or table to hide behind. Nowhere to retreat. Eleanor and William arrived exactly on time. Eleanor looked immaculate as always, but there was something brittle in her composure, a tightness around her eyes that betrayed stress. William looked tired, but resolute. Thank you all for coming, Dr. Bennett began after introductions. I understand there have been some significant conflicts in the family, and Michael has asked for this session to address them directly. Before we begin, I want to establish that this is a safe space for honest communication. No interrupting, no personal attacks. We're here to listen and understand each other. Agreed. We all nodded, though Eleanor's was barely perceptible. Michael, since you arranged this meeting, perhaps you'd like to start. Michael took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I've asked us all to be here because I believe we're at a crucial turning point. The events at the dinner party brought to light patterns that have been damaging our family relationships for years. Mum, Dad, I love you both. But the way we've been functioning as a family isn't healthy, and it's put my marriage in jeopardy. Eleanor's posture stiffened. If your marriage is in jeopardy, perhaps that has more to do with Charlotte's inability to adapt to our family's standards and expectations. Dr. Bennett raised a gentle hand. Eleanor, please remember our agreement about interrupting. Michael should have the chance to express himself fully. Michael continued, his voice growing steadier. Mom, what happened at the dinner party was inexcusable. You humiliated my wife in our home, told her she had no right to speak, and physically pushed her. But that incident didn't happen in isolation. It was the culmination of years of subtle and not so subtle attempts to control our lives and undermine Charlotte. That's absurd, Eleanor interjected. Everything I've done has been for this family's benefit. For your benefit, Michael. Please, Eleanor, Dr. Bennett said. You'll have your turn to respond. Michael pressed on. I've discovered some disturbing things this past week. Mom, did you install monitoring software on my laptop to read my emails? Eleanor's face flushed. I occasionally glanced at your emails when you left your computer at the house. As your mother, I have a right to... No, you don't, Michael said firmly. I'm 32 years old. My communications with my wife are private. We found evidence that it wasn't occasional glancing, I added quietly. There was surveillance software installed. My personal journals were accessed as well. William looked shocked. Eleanor, tell me you didn't do this. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. You don't understand. I was protecting our family. Charlotte has been trying to pull Michael away from us from his responsibilities. That's not true, I said, keeping my voice calm despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. I've never tried to come between Michael and his family. I've spent 5 years trying to fit into the role you designed for me, suppressing my own identity and career to meet your expectations. Dr. Bennett nodded encouragingly. Charlotte, can you elaborate on how that has felt for you? I took a deep breath. From the day I met Eleanor, I've been made to feel that I'm not good enough. My background, my career, my values, all have been treated as deficiencies to be corrected. I've been excluded, criticized, and manipulated. The dinner party was just the most public example. Eleanor scoffed. So dramatic. I've only tried to help you adjust to our world. You came from such limited circumstances. Mom, Michael interrupted, that's exactly the kind of condescension Charlotte is talking about. And there's something else we need to address. He turned to face his mother directly. Did you interfere in my relationship with Rachel 5 years ago? Did you tell her I wanted a post-nuptial agreement that would leave her nothing? The colour drained from Eleanor's face. For perhaps the first time since I'd known her, she seemed at a loss for words. How did you... She began, then stopped herself. So it's true, Michael said, his voice tight with controlled anger. You deliberately sabotaged my engagement. William stood abruptly. Eleanor, tell me you didn't do this. Eleanor's eyes darted between her husband and son, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. She wasn't right for you, Michael. She wouldn't have fit into our world. That wasn't your decision to make. Michael's voice rose despite his efforts to remain calm. You lied to her, manipulated her, drove her away, and let me believe she'd rejected me. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Dr. Bennett intervened gently. Let's take a moment to breathe. These are significant revelations, and everyone needs space to process them. In the silence that followed, I watched Eleanor's face. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Fear of losing her son, fear of losing control, fear of being exposed. William broke the silence, his voice heavy with disappointment. Eleanor, I've supported you in so many things over the years. I've looked the other way when your behavior became controlling. I told myself it was just your way of showing love. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined. Eleanor turned to him, panic flashing across her features. Well, you don't understand. Everything I've done has been for this family, to protect what we've built. No, William said firmly. It's been to control what you fear losing. There's a difference. Michael reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. Charlotte and I have made a decision. We're selling the house and moving. We need a fresh start away from this toxic dynamic. Eleanor's head snapped up. Moving? Where you can't just leave. What about the company, your responsibilities? I'll continue working for Harrison Development, but remotely for the most part. Dad and I have already discussed it. You knew about this. Eleanor turned accusingly to William. I support it, he replied simply. They need space to rebuild their marriage, a marriage that your actions have damaged, Eleanor. Eleanor's face hardened. If you do this, Michael, there will be consequences, financial consequences. The trust fund has conditions. Are you threatening to cut me off? Michael asked incredulously. I'm reminding you of your obligations to this family. I don't need the trust fund, Michael said, his voice steady. I've been building my own investments for years, and if maintaining access to family money means subjecting my wife to continued disrespect and manipulation, then I choose Charlotte. The words I'd waited 5 years to hear. I squeezed Michael's hand, tears pricking at my eyes. Eleanor must have seen something change in my expression because she suddenly turned to me. This is your doing. You've turned my son against me. You've never understood our world, our traditions. That's not fair, Eleanor, Dr. Bennett interjected. Charlotte is not responsible for the consequences of your actions. You don't know anything about me or my actions, Eleanor snapped. You don't know what I've sacrificed for this family. Then tell us, I said, surprising everyone, including myself. Help us understand. Eleanor stared at me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. Then, to my astonishment, she began to speak, really speak, about her own past. I didn't come from money, she said quietly. My father owned a hardware store. We were comfortable, but nowhere near the Harrison circle. When I met William at Northwestern, I knew he was different. Not just wealthy, but from a family with history with influence. She looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. His mother was like ice to me. Nothing I did was good enough. My clothes were wrong, my accent was wrong, my education was inadequate. For 3 years, I endured her subtle cruelty, her exclusion, her constant reminder that I didn't belong. William reached for her hand, but she pulled away. When she finally died, I swore I would never be vulnerable like that again. I would become what she was, the perfect Harrison matriarch. I would protect this family's position, its legacy. She looked up, her eyes hard. I became what I had to become. The revelation stunned me. Eleanor had experienced the same treatment she had inflicted on me. The cycle of hurt and control had simply repeated itself generation after generation. "Mom," Michael said gently, "can't you see that you're doing to Charlotte exactly what was done to you? Creating the same pain, the same sense of exclusion." Eleanor's composure faltered. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the wounded young woman beneath the polished exterior. "It's different," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's exactly the same," William said. "And I've failed both of you by not stopping it, with my mother and now with you." Dr. Bennett spoke into the heavy silence that followed. "It seems we're uncovering patterns that have persisted across generations. The question now is whether you're willing to break those patterns to create something healthier for the future." "What does that mean exactly?" Eleanor asked wearily. Michael answered, "It means real change, Mom. It means respecting boundaries. It means treating Charlotte as my equal partner, not as an outsider to be controlled or excluded. It means no more interference in our marriage. And if I can't accept those terms," her voice was brittle, "then we'll have to limit our contact," Michael said sadly. "I don't want that. I want you in our lives, but not at the expense of my marriage or Charlotte's well-being." Eleanor turned to me, her gaze direct and challenging. "And what do you want, Charlotte?" I considered the question carefully. Despite everything, I didn't want to destroy this family. I wanted to transform it. "I want a relationship based on mutual respect," I said finally. "I want acknowledgement of the harm that's been done. I want a genuine apology, not for show, not to smooth things over, but because you recognize that your actions were wrong. And moving forward, I want healthy boundaries that everyone respects." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. "You're asking a great deal." "I'm asking for basic dignity," I replied. "Nothing more, nothing less." The session ended without resolution. Eleanor needed time to process everything that had been said, everything that had been revealed. Dr. Bennett suggested we meet again in a week, giving everyone space to reflect. As we left the office, William pulled me aside. "Thank you for your honesty today, and for your willingness to work toward healing despite everything that's happened." "I love Michael," I said simply, "and family is important to me. A healthy family." William nodded. "I've enabled Eleanor's behaviour for too long. That changes now." True to our word, Michael and I listed the house for sale the following day. We began looking at properties in a suburb closer to where I had taught, far enough from Eleanor's influence to give us breathing room, but not so far as to cut ties completely. Eleanor remained distant in the days that followed, communicating only through William. Michael continued going to work at the family company, but maintained the boundaries he had established. The change in him was remarkable, as if standing up to his mother had unleashed a confidence and clarity he'd never fully expressed before. "I should have done this years ago," he told me, as we toured a charming craftsman-style house with a garden perfect for the family we hoped to build. "I was so afraid of rocking the boat, of disappointing her, that I couldn't see how much it was costing us." "We both contributed to the situation," I acknowledged. "I kept quiet too often, tried too hard to fit a mold that wasn't designed for me." The real shock came 3 days before our follow-up session with Dr. Bennett. I was at Amanda's apartment packing the few things I'd brought with me when Michael called. "My mother's here," he said, his voice tight with tension. "She wants to talk to you. Just you." "What? Why?" "She wouldn't say, just that it's important." I told her I wouldn't ask you unless she promised to be respectful. I considered refusing. After everything that had happened, the thought of facing Eleanor alone was intimidating. But perhaps this was a necessary step. "I'll come," I decided. "But I want you nearby, even if not in the same room." When I arrived at the house, our house at least for a few more weeks, Eleanor was sitting in the living room, her posture rigid, hands clasped in her lap. She looked older somehow, the carefully maintained facade showing cracks. "Thank you for coming," she said formally as I sat across from her. "Michael said you wanted to speak with me." Eleanor nodded, uncharacteristically hesitant. "What happened in Dr. Bennett's office? It forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths. About myself, about my behaviour." I remained silent, waiting. "William and I have been talking. Really talking perhaps for the first time in decades. He's been quite direct about his disappointment in how I've handled things." This was unexpected. William had always deferred to Eleanor, smoothing over conflicts rather than addressing them. "I've also spoken with Susan Phillips," Eleanor continued, surprising me further. "She was quite candid about her impressions of the dinner party incident. And about you." "What did she say?" "That you showed remarkable grace under pressure, that your insights about early childhood education were impressive, that my behaviour was, in her words, utterly unacceptable in any context but especially toward a family member." Eleanor smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. "It's not easy for me to hear such things, to have my actions viewed through others' eyes." "It's not easy for anyone," I said quietly, "but it's necessary sometimes." She looked up at me, then really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. "I owe you an apology, Charlotte, a genuine one. My behaviour at the dinner party was inexcusable. The pushing, the public humiliation, I'm deeply ashamed." The words seemed to cost her greatly. Eleanor Harrison did not apologise, ever. "And it wasn't just the dinner party," she continued. "For 5 years I've treated you as an outsider, as someone lesser. I've interfered in your marriage, invaded your privacy, undermined your confidence. I've tried to mould you into something you're not, just as William's mother tried to do to me." "Why?" I asked the question that had haunted me for years. "What were you so afraid of?" Eleanor's perfectly composed expression faltered. "Losing him, losing my place in his life. When Michael met you, something changed. He was happier, more independent. He began questioning family traditions, business practices that had been in place for generations. I saw you as a threat to everything I had built, everything I had become. I never wanted to take him away from you," I said. "I just wanted to build a life with him, a partnership. I understand that now. Too late, perhaps." "It's not too late," I said, surprising myself with the words. "It's never too late to change a relationship, to build something healthier." Eleanor looked skeptical. "After everything I've done..." "It won't be easy," I acknowledged. "Trust has been broken. Healing will take time and consistent effort from everyone. But yes, I believe it's possible." "What would that look like?" she asked, and I realised she genuinely didn't know. Eleanor had only ever experienced family relationships built on control and appearances. It would mean respecting boundaries, asking before visiting our home, not criticising my choices or background, treating me as Michael's equal partner, not as an accessory or an interloper, acknowledging my expertise in my field as I acknowledge yours and yours. Eleanor nodded slowly. "And in return, you remain an important part of our lives. We visit regularly, share holidays, build new traditions together. Your relationship with Michael remains strong, but it evolves into something appropriate for a mother and her adult son." "I'm not sure I know how to do that," Eleanor admitted, vulnerability showing through her carefully constructed facade. "The way I've been for so long, it's become who I am. It's who you've believed you needed to be," I corrected gently. "But it's not all of who you are." We talked for nearly 2 hours, laying the groundwork for what a new relationship might look like. There were difficult moments. Old patterns emerged, defensive reactions flared. But beneath it all was a surprising current of something I'd never expected to find with Eleanor: common ground. We both loved Michael. We both valued family. We both knew what it felt like to be treated as an outsider. As our conversation wound down, Eleanor hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small worn photograph. She handed it to me without explanation. It showed a young woman in a simple dress, her smile bright and unguarded. Nothing like the controlled expressions I'd seen on Eleanor's face. She stood beside a hardware store, arm in arm with a man in work clothes. "My parents," Eleanor explained. "Outside the store. I was 19 when that was taken home from my first year at Northwestern." I studied the photograph, seeing in the young woman's face glimpses of the Eleanor who might have been without the armour of wealth and social position. "You look happy," I observed. "I was," she said simply, "before I learnt to be someone else." "Okay." She stood to leave, smoothing her immaculate outfit. "I can't promise immediate transformation, Charlotte, Patterns this deep don't change overnight, but I am willing to try. For Michael, for the family we might still be. As I watched her walk to her car, perfectly poised as always, I wondered if real change was possible after so many years of entrenched behaviour. But the photograph of the smiling young woman by the hardware store gave me hope. That woman still existed somewhere inside Eleanor Harrison. Perhaps it was time for her to emerge again. The following months brought changes I could never have imagined. True to our word, Michael and I sold the house and purchased the craftsman home I had fallen in love with. It was smaller, less ostentatious than our previous residence, but it felt like ours in a way the other house never had. Eleanor's transformation wasn't immediate or perfect. Old habits emerged when she was stressed or felt threatened. There were tense moments, awkward silences, occasional retreats to familiar patterns. But there was also genuine effort. Her first visit to our new home was telling. She arrived with a housewarming gift. Not the expensive art or crystal she would have chosen before, but a handmade quilt from a local artisan. "I know it can't replace your grandmother's," she said awkwardly as I unwrapped it. "But I remembered you mentioning you liked handmade things." The gesture moved me more than any expensive gift could have. "It's beautiful, Eleanor. Thank you." She looked around the house, taking in the comfortable furniture, the colourful walls, the bookshelves filled with my teaching resources and favourite novels. I waited for the subtle criticisms, the suggestions for improvement. Instead, she said, "It suits you both. It feels like a home." Michael was as surprised as I was by his mother's efforts. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," he confessed after she left. For her to revert completely to her old self. She might sometimes, I acknowledged. Change isn't linear, but I think she's genuinely trying. William's transformation was equally remarkable. After decades of deferring to Eleanor, he began asserting himself more, gently but firmly establishing his own boundaries and supporting ours. He became a regular visitor, sometimes coming alone to help Michael with projects around the house or to simply talk over coffee. "I've missed so much over the years," he told me one afternoon as we sat on the porch swing. "Always focused on business, always letting Eleanor handle the family dynamics. I don't want to miss any more." 3 months after moving into our new home, I discovered I was pregnant. We decided to share the news with Eleanor and William over dinner at a neutral restaurant, somewhere with no history, no power dynamics attached to it. Eleanor's reaction was complex, joy mingled with uncertainty about her role as a grandmother. "I suppose you'll have your own ideas about how to raise children," she said, a hint of the old defensiveness creeping into her tone. "We will," I agreed. "But we also value family. We want our child to know their grandparents, to have those relationships. With boundaries," Michael added firmly. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Of course, boundaries." The word still seemed foreign to her, but she was learning. As my pregnancy progressed, something unexpected happened. Eleanor began to soften in ways I hadn't thought possible. She offered advice when asked, but tried not to impose. She expressed interest in my plans to return to teaching part-time after the baby was born. Most surprisingly, when we decided to convert the home office into a nursery, she offered to help. I was wary at first, expecting her to take over as she had with our wedding, but she approached it differently. "What theme were you thinking of?" she asked. "What colours do you like?" We worked on the nursery together over several weekends, an unlikely collaboration that somehow became a bridge between us. Eleanor's eye for design was undeniable, and when she focused on bringing my vision to life rather than imposing her own, the results were beautiful. During one of these weekends, as we painted clouds on the ceiling, Eleanor paused, paintbrush in hand. "I've been seeing someone," she said abruptly. "A therapist. On my own, not just with William." That's wonderful," I said, genuinely impressed by her commitment to change. "It's not easy," she admitted. "Examining patterns established over decades, confronting the reasons behind my behaviour." She added a delicate swirl to a cloud before continuing. "Did you know my mother left when I was 11, just walked away from our family? No explanation, no contact afterward. I hadn't known." Eleanor had never shared anything so personal before. I promised myself I would never be that vulnerable again. Never love someone who could walk away, but I've been learning that control isn't the same as connection, that you can't really love someone if you're trying to possess them. Her revelation created a new understanding between us, not excusing the past, but providing context that helped us move forward. When our daughter Lily was born on a snowy January morning, Eleanor and William were at the hospital within hours. bearing flowers and a small, soft rabbit toy. "May I?" Eleanor asked hesitantly, arms outstretched toward the tiny bundle in my arms. I nodded carefully, transferring my daughter to her grandmother. Eleanor's face transformed as she looked down at Lily, the carefully constructed mask falling away completely. "She's perfect," she whispered. "She has your eyes, Charlotte." In that moment, watching Eleanor hold my daughter with such gentle wonder, I realized how far we had come. Not to perfect harmony, not to a fairy tale ending where all hurts were magically healed, but to something real and valuable. A family being rebuilt on a foundation of respect rather than control. The journey continued over the following years. Michael thrived in his role as both businessman and father, finding a balance that his own father never had. I returned to teaching part-time and began developing curriculum for a small progressive preschool in our community. Eleanor had setbacks, moments when old patterns emerged, when the need to control battled with her desire for genuine connection. But each time she caught herself more quickly, apologized more sincerely, and returned to the new path we were forging together. William flourished in his newfound assertiveness, becoming more engaged in family life than he had been in decades. He and Michael developed a deeper relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. By the time Lily was 2, Eleanor had transformed enough that we trusted her for occasional babysitting, something I could never have imagined in the early days of our conflict. She approached grandmotherhood with the same perfectionism she applied to everything, but channeled it into loving attention rather than control. "You know," she told me one evening as we watched Lily playing in the garden, "I was wrong about so many things, but especially about you. Your strength, your dignity that night at the dinner party, it changed everything. Not just for you and Michael, but for me, for all of us." "It wasn't easy," I admitted. "Standing up to you was terrifying." "The best things rarely come easily," she said with a wisdom I wouldn't have credited her with before. "I've learned that rather late in life, but perhaps better late than never." Looking back on that fateful dinner party now, I can see it as the breaking point we needed. The moment when long-established patterns shattered, creating space for something new to grow. Eleanor's public humiliation of me, her declaration that I had no right to speak in this house, her physical push, all were inexcusable acts that revealed the toxic dynamic that had been poisoning our family for years. But from that broken ground, something unexpected bloomed: authenticity. Eleanor slowly shedding the armor she'd worn for decades. William finding his voice after years of silence. Michael standing firmly as his own man, neither controlled by his mother nor alienated from her. And me finally claiming my place, not as an outsider trying to fit in, but as an equal member of the family we were creating together. 2 years have passed since that life-changing dinner party. Today we're gathered in our backyard for Lily's 2nd birthday. Our home is filled with a mix of people who would never have been in the same space before. My teaching colleagues, Michael's business associates, neighbours from our new community, and yes, Eleanor and William. Eleanor still wears designer clothes and perfect makeup, but there's an authenticity to her now that was missing before. She sits on a blanket in the grass with Lily, heedless of grass stains on her expensive slacks, helping my daughter arrange a tower of blocks. William chats easily with my sister Amanda, whom Eleanor once dismissed as bohemian, not a compliment in her vocabulary. Michael mans the grill, looking relaxed and happy in a way he rarely did during our early years together. As I bring out the homemade birthday cake, nothing elaborate, just a simple vanilla cake with buttercream frosting that Lily helped decorate with colourful sprinkles, I catch Eleanor's eye across the yard. She smiles, a real smile that reaches her eyes, and nods slightly in acknowledgement of how far we've come. The journey hasn't been easy. Real change never is. There have been difficult conversations, painful realizations, moments when old wounds reopened. Eleanor still struggles sometimes with letting go of control, with accepting that her way isn't the only valid approach. I still find myself occasionally bracing for criticism or exclusion, phantom pains from injuries that have largely healed. But we keep trying, keep communicating, keep choosing respect over resentment. And in doing so, we've created something I once thought impossible, a family where everyone has the right to speak, to be heard, to belong. As we gather around to sing Happy Birthday, Lily on my lap and Michael's arm around my shoulders, I realize that the greatest gift we've given our daughter isn't material wealth or social position. It's the example of people who were brave enough to break destructive patterns, who chose growth over comfort, who transformed conflict into connection. Eleanor catches my eye again as the song ends and Lily blows out her candles with Michael's help. There's an unspoken understanding between us now, a recognition of the difficult path we've walked together, not as adversaries anymore, but as two women who found the courage to create something better than what came before. That push in the dining room was indeed a turning point, but not in the way Eleanor intended. Instead of diminishing me, it became the catalyst for change that ultimately saved our family. Sometimes we need to be pushed to our breaking point before we find the strength to stand firmly in our truth. And sometimes the people we least expect to change are the ones who surprise us the most. If you've struggled with difficult in-laws or family dynamics that seemed impossible to change, I hope our story gives you hope. Standing up for yourself with dignity doesn't have to mean cutting ties. Sometimes it creates the possibility for something new to grow. Have you experienced a similar transformation in your family relationships? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that change is possible, even in the most entrenched family dynamics. Thank you for being part of our community, and remember, it's never too late to create the family relationship you deserve.